Today's Gospel of the Transfiguration occurs many times through the year. It has its own feast in August. It appears at least once probably on the Sunday cycle. It appears during the week. It appears probably on some saints' days. And it appears on the second Sunday of Lent every year, regardless of which year we are in. It's an incredibly important story, and one that truly caught the imagination of the early church. In the early church, as there was this developing theology of an understanding of who Christ was, there was reflection upon this story. And it seems like a trivial point to us today, but for them it was very, very serious. And the question is this. When we see in the story that it says that Jesus was transfigured before them and his clothes were dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them, what was that light? And where did it come from? Again, it doesn't seem like much of a question. It doesn't seem all that interesting. But indeed it is. It's a very interesting question. Was that the same light that God created on the first and fourth days of creation in Genesis? When God said, "Let there be light"? When God said, "Let there be stars in the sky and a great light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night"? Is that the kind of light that Jesus emanated? Is it the same kind of light that we see from these lights or from the light that we see in nature? The answer of the church was, no, it's not. That's not the light that Jesus was emanating. The light that he's emanating is uncreated. It's the light that emanates from himself as God. And that's why the story is called the Transfiguration in a certain sense, right? That we see Jesus not as Jesus of Nazareth, not the son of Mary, not the carpenter's son, right? We see the Son of God. We see the second person of the Trinity, right? Jesus is revealed as to who he is, who he truly is. And it's so dazzling that they can't see it. Now, why is that interesting? Well, because we see Jesus all the time. We see Jesus in the sacrament of the altar. We see Jesus in the charity of one another. But we don't see a dazzling light, right? In fact, if we did, I think if that was the case, there'd probably be a lot more Christians, right? But that's not the case. But that doesn't mean the light isn't there. And that goes back to the story, right? Jesus didn't turn on the light. That is the light that was always with him, right? That was the light that he always exuded as the second person of the Trinity, as the Son of God. But we can't see it. Why? Well, again, going back to the early church, and this is in the early centuries of the church reflected upon this. A lot of Christians in the early days, early centuries, fled to the Egyptian and Syrian desert and lived as hermits, and then later in communities of hermits. And they reflected upon the tradition. They reflected upon these questions. And they came to the conclusion that why don't we see this light? Why can't we see it? And the answer was very simple, and it's one that we all know if you thought about it for a second or two. Original sin. Sin. Think back to the old traditional answer of what is original sin. Darkening of the mind, weakening of the will, darkening of the mind. Our eyes no longer can see God as God really is. Right? And then for those early desert fathers and mothers, the quest then become, how do I bring back what they call the spiritual senses? Right? With my physical eyes, I can see these lights. Right? But with the spiritual senses, I see the world as God sees it. Right? And through conversion, through penance, what we would call penance, right? And part of that was penitential in the sense of fasting, almsgiving, acts of charity, right? But it wasn't just that for doing that for all by itself. It was related to conversion. That the more I can unite my heart with the heart of Christ, I can restore the spiritual senses. I can see the world the way God sees it. And when I see the world the way God sees it, I see something very different from what I see with my physical eyes. Right? That's the quest of Lent. The quest of Lent is to restore, if you will, our spiritual senses, our ability to see God for who God really is. And again, we don't mean on Easter Sunday we're going to be dazzled with light. Right? But hopefully by Easter we'll have been restored in a little further along on the journey, right? Where we will come and see God and see the world the way God sees it. Right? Through God's grace. Through God's grace. And if we see the world the way God sees it, then we will hopefully live in the world the way God lives in it. We will make the great commandment real.